Welcome back. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. Monica Lewinsky believes she is the first ever victim of the internet. In 1998, Lewinsky was a 23-year-old former intern at the White House. She had no public profile to speak of, but then the world learned of her affair with the most public man in America, the President of the United States. The affair was first reported in early 1998 by the then fledgling website, The Drudge Report. Mainstream media, the newspapers and evening news and 24-hour cable news channels picked up the story and ran with it for months. Then, in September 1998, Special Prosecutor Ken Starr used the internet to release a report on the affair. 445 pages of the most intimate details of Lewinsky's sexual relationship with President Clinton. After that, we all knew those details, and we knew her face, and we knew her name.
Overnight, I went from being a completely private figure to a publicly humiliated one. I was patient zero, the first person to have their reputation completely destroyed worldwide via the internet.
That was Lewinsky on Monday at the Forbes 30 Under 30 event in her first public speech after 10 years spent more or less in hiding. Lewinsky recalled the day the Starr report was released in September 1998 and her reading every excruciating word, knowing that everyone in the world with an internet connection could do the same.
I couldn't imagine ever showing my face in public again. I cringed, I yelled, I sobbed. And the mantra continued, I just want to die.
Her name had become a punchline, and one with serious staying power. Less than a year ago, 15 years after the Starr report was published, Beyoncé released Partition, a song that includes a less than subtle reference to what happened to Lewinsky's blue dress. Now, Lewinsky is returning to public life, saying she hopes that her unique story of hyper-public humiliation can help draw attention to the much more universal problem of cyberbullying and online harassment. She cites in particular the death of Tyler Clemente, the Rutgers University student who committed suicide in 2010 after his roommate secretly filmed his intimate encounter with another man and streamed it online. Lewinsky said that while she was touched by the tragedy, her mother was particularly upset.
She was back in 1998, back to a time when I was periodically suicidal, when she might very easily have lost me, when I too might have been humiliated to death.
We don't have comprehensive data on how many people take their own lives due to bullying or online harassment. But there is some research that shows that while traditional, in real life bullying can increase the risk of suicide, cyberbullying increases or heightens that risk even more. In her speech, Lewinsky tried to capture the unique feeling of being humiliated in a forum as broad as the internet.
The experience of shame and humiliation online is different than offline. There is no way to wrap your mind around where the humiliation ends. There are no borders.
And it is that point where I want to begin. Joining me now, Anthea Butler, professor of religious studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Liz Plank, senior editor at the news site Mike.com. Soraya Chemley, who writes for the Huffington Post, the Feminist Wire, and more on issues of feminism, gender, and culture. And Tyler Coates, deputy editor of Decider.com. So, we hear from Lewinsky there the possibility that online harassment is more than just something different in form, that it may also be like substantively, meaningfully different than even the kind of horror that is face-to-face bullying.
Right. I think it's no coincidence that the first person whose life was ruined by the internet happened to be a woman, just like it's no coincidence that the biggest celebrity hack of nude photos of all time was like 97% photos of women.
Right. Right. Both happening to women and specifically about slut shaming and sexuality. Yeah.
Exactly. It had to do with women's sexuality and that shame involved, right? And so the internet is a space that is still very unsafe for women, just like sidewalks. And so I think it means a lot for Monica Lewinsky to come out and say, I don't want this self-imposed shame. I'm coming out and I'm not going to apologize for doing the affair. I'm going to come out and have a wider message.
So what do we do with the argument And you know, I'm raising a almost 13-year-old girl, and there's a part of me as mom that just wants to say, so don't read it. So don't go on Instagram. So don't go on the Twitters. Don't worry about the Facebook. I mean, it always seems to me like that is the kind of initial response. What do you do with that as a response to this?
I don't think it's a really practical response because it's so integral to our lives, right? It's an essential aspect of the way we interact at school, the way we interact at work. It's our public forum. And so ceding that ground as a woman, certainly telling young women to cede that ground, I think is really the wrong message to send. I think we need to look at what's happening, what the dynamics are, what the gender dynamics are, because the word bullying or the word harassment kind of masks that. It really doesn't tell enough of the granular detail of how differently girls and boys are treated. And we're teaching children that they're equal, right? They run into this wall of double standards when they enter puberty. And that's when we really see the effects take place, and we see them in much more amplified ways online.
But it does feel like if there were one place where men and women, boys and girls would be equal, it would be in the digital space, right? Because everybody is a little picture, and everybody has 140 characters, and everybody has literally the same platform, right? So wouldn't this, I mean, it feels as though structurally it is built to generate a kind of egalitarian space in terms of gender, in terms of race, that maybe only in terms of a kind of digital divide of class access, but beyond that, it ought to be the most egalitarian of all of our spaces.
Oh, absolutely. I think that men and women still online receive different forms of harassment, and even in the most recent Pew research has shown that men respond to harassment in different ways than women because it's sort of, as you were saying, something that they can shake off. I've experienced it too, probably not in ways that a lot of my female friends who write for the internet have received awful, horrific things. And it has been something that I kind of have just tried to ignore. As a gay man, I think that I experience misogyny in a different way, but still do. But it's something, you know, growing up as a kid who was bullied as well, you kind of condition yourself to ignore it in a way that I guess as an adult you are more prepared for.
And yet, I think even as I, think to myself, well, just ignore it, which is an awful lot of the strategy I've taken myself recently, Anthea. And yet I think about Hannah Arendt suggesting that that kind of isolationism is what terrorism is. It is to isolate us and separate us. I am at a point where I don't retweet anything that I really like because I fear that I would send all of my hate or all of the harassment that comes to me over to some person who doesn't deserve it. And so I keep thinking, okay, I guess it is having an effect. It's literally quieting whatever little digital voice I might have otherwise had.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you were on Twitter at the beginning, you were very
I loved it. It was like a Twitter party.
You're a very active user, and I think this is one of the problems that Twitter has right now, is that those of us who have been active users become less active because of what is happening. So, but I'm thinking about the statement you made, we were a little avatar and a little picture. So some of the African-American women I followed online changed their pictures to white men. And what happens to you when you change to a white man? Nobody bothers you. You can say what you want. And so that moment you change your avatar into a white male or, even a white woman sometimes, but mostly a white male. If you change into a white male, you are not harassed. And I'm thinking of several people who've done this. I don't want to call their handles out, but it just changes. So whenever,
But that's also amazing. Just a fascinating social psychological experiment to get a chance, whoever gets to achieve white maleness, right? And to literally be able to do it overnight.
So the whole thing is about the biases that people have in real life, follow them into the internet. So if you are you racialize everything, you're going to racialize it on the internet. If you don't like women, you're going to do that on the internet. All the things you don't like are going to go into your internet life.
Right. And I will say one thing. I think that idea of disembodiment and freedom was really central to when the internet began, right? All of that technology, all of that utopianism about how we could radically change this environment and our free speech ideas. And in the last 5 years, there's been this exponential change in technology that makes it much more photo intensive, right? And the introduction, the proliferation, the really pervasive use of photography has, I think, amplified status quo inequities as opposed to helping dissipate them. So something like this, where people are changing their avatars, really speaks to that idea of how racialized and sexualized those interactions can become.
So this is fascinating, right? Because initially it is that kind of perfect Descartesian dualism where you could have been just pure ideas, right? In fact, some of my favorite people initially to follow in social media were cats, or like something like I had no idea what they were, and they had bizarre names and that sort of thing. But you're right. As we move from 140 characters to primarily being that your greatest clicks come when you have the picture or the video or the Instagram instead or the Vine, then all of the embodiment comes back. You're no longer just disembodied thought. More on this. Up next, is there a direct line from Monica Lewinsky's story in 1998 to the story of Gamergate in 2014? I'm not sure. Let's talk about that when we come back.